end of a long day, I'm sure, of talking about marketing. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about the promise of retail media and the power of convenience. I recognize convenience in that because I'll talk a little bit about Deliveroo for those that may not know, but Deliveroo is really kind of like stands on two main principles: operations, making sure that we can get a rider to a restaurant and then to your door, and then also convenience. That's a big part of what we are. So without further ado, Deliveroo is very much part of both of those things, convenience and operations, but ultimately we're a three-sided marketplace. And so what does that mean practically? Well, ultimately we are connecting consumers with partners, and partners being grocers, with restaurant providers, through our rider network. A rider network being around, roughly 190,000 independent contractors. And we operate in 10 markets as well, and we're usually either one or two in those markets. If we're not sort of one of the first or second in terms of market share, we usually exit those markets. We've done a few exits in the last few years. And UKI remains our sort of like core market, very London-based. We started in London 11 years ago. UKI still remains our kind of like core market. So what does advertising look like for us? So I spent the last 2 years building and running the retail media proposition for Deliveroo. We call it Deliveroo Media and E-commerce. And originally what that was really to provide grocery partners and restaurants with sponsored positioning. And that's kind of what we think of when we think of retail media, right? It's how do I get my brand sort of positioned in higher up in the user journey? How can I get that in front of consumers? And that's still a core part of our advertising and retail media offering. But what we started to do a couple years ago, and this is where we sort of forayed into working with FMCG brands, and really any brand that had some synergy with Deliveroo in some sense. So we can think like streaming video, film, gaming, things that just go well with food. We started to open that up to what we call non-endemic partners in that sense. And so now we sell all kinds of products on the platform. We announced in November last year that we were going into what we call retail or Deliveroo shopping. And you'll start to see a lot more sort of non-food items being on the platform. We did a partnership with Screwfix actually recently where we stock about 500 items there, and that business is growing. So advertising is evolving on Deliveroo, and it will continue to evolve. So when I talk about convenience, I talk about moments as well, because moments is really sort of part of that shopper journey. It's part of that that idea of if I want something, I need it now, where am I going to go? Deliveroo is oftentimes the thing that comes to mind in those need states. And we also know that shopper emissions are quite different in Q-commerce, and Deliveroo very much sits in that kind of quick commerce, rapid delivery segmentation, which is very different from traditional .coms. If you can think of like when you order from Sainsbury's, that might be a bigger shop. Typically, it's around £90 per average order. Deliveroo is more like £30. Obviously, it's very different in terms of when you're going to get that. Deliveroo is going to be on average between 20 and 30 minutes. Sainsbury's might be next day, might be 2 days. So it's really built around need state, and so it's a combination of kind of reactive and proactive decision making. And some of those moments are up here where it's like, all right, like right now, there's bad weather. What am I going to do? I don't want to go to the shop. Deliveroo becomes that kind of convenient platform where you can get what you need. But it's more than that. It's if I've missed something out on a recipe I'm cooking, if it's a midweek top-up, or you might have friends over and you want to, top up on alcohol or snacks or something like that. Those are really where Deliveroo comes into play. And so it's built really around kind of like three core principles in terms of our value proposition on the grocery side. That's going to be value, availability, and convenience, bringing value back to the consumer, making sure that there isn't a price premium that is sort of outside of the bounds of convenience, and that premium is still justified. Making sure that we have as many products available, and we listen to our consumers all the time. There was a snapshot of Apple earbuds earlier. We put those on the platform because we saw that those were highly searched. We actually sold 50,000 pounds worth of Apple earbuds last quarter. So things like that, we're listening to our consumers, making sure that we have the product availability, putting it on the platform through our retailers, and then finally that convenience thing that I talked about, which again I think can't be understated really, because it's ultimately built around that. Our consumers, we know, prioritizes convenience. They're typically sort of young families, young professionals, students, graduates, demographics that are usually time poor, and therefore they prioritize convenience. They're willing to pay a premium for that convenience, and that's where we come into play. So if I look at retail media and start to define it, I think it's important, especially now because retail media has really evolved. It doesn't mean the same thing to all retail media platforms. It doesn't mean the same to all advertisers or marketers for that sense. So ultimately what it is marketing to consumers near or at the point of purchase, and where the consumer is choosing between a competitive brand or a product. And that's kind of the core around retail media that makes it interesting to marketers and advertisers. It's also the thing that kind of makes it confusing, because how you're sort of meeting those moments, how you're positioning your brand at those times can change dramatically from platform to platform. And so for retailers, like, you know, I think we've spoken to like Co-op, who's presenting, I think, in the other hall at this moment, and all of our retailers, Deliveroo included, they're looking at ways to monetize inventory, data, and audiences, and that's really created this new revenue stream, and that's kind of what's fueling the hype, you know, around this burgeoning kind of like idea around retail media. So the other part of this is that there is a rumbling that consumer loyalty is at risk, and that platforms like Deliveroo or retail media provide an opportunity for brands to meet consumers in those buying moments and start to build brand loyalty, brand affinity in these kind of like newer platforms. So if we look at customer loyalty at risk, I recognize it's probably a little bit small for y'all to see, but ultimately brands want to win the consumer moment, but then also win, you know, a potentially like a converter or a brand switcher. And so we worked with Criteo here to understand what are those categories that, you know, are typically sort of like more loyal and ones where there's typically more brand switchers. We can see here that baby and toddler it's one where a category where there's a lot of brand loyalty, where there won't necessarily be a lot of switching. And granted, that changes from product to product and by platform, but you know, typically we see the opposite when it comes to health and beauty, where there's a lot more brand switching. And so for an advertiser or marketer, being sort of front and center in those moments provides an opportunity to kind of like, you know, potentially convert a user, and then, you know, ideally get some kind of customer lifetime value out of there if you can build that sort of connection with them. So retail media, as we said, has evolved. The definition keeps changing. It kind of started 10, 12 years ago with the marketplaces, so Amazon and eBay in the US mostly. Obviously, that's changed a lot, and that was really kind of like built around sponsored products, positioning, what we think of as retail media, but it's obviously evolved since then. There was an early adoption phase where grocers and sort of other retailers were leveraging their e-com platforms to build advertiser opportunities. And then we're kind of now in this like third stage of proliferation, where we're starting to see, you know, all kinds of retailers with their different media offerings. Typically traditionally they were starting with kind of third-party providers, like the Criteos, Citrus Ads of the world, et cetera. But typically we're starting to see a lot more advertising platforms start to in-house. And there's a few reasons for that. One of it's kind of like control over data, control over the product development. But ultimately, some of these things are so customized that it's tough to go with a third-party provider. It makes sense for some, but potentially not others. So we're really in that third bucket. So if we look at kind of like why all the hype around retail media and is it justified, I think we'll dispel some of those myths around like, you know, what it takes to build and run one of these. The last 2 years have been challenging, to say the least, but ultimately it's around kind of like this metric, and you might have seen this one from eMarketer on the right, which says that, you know, globally digital ad spend will sort of be around roughly a fifth for retail media this year. That's projected to grow. It's grown 22% year on year, and it's supposed to sort of you know, hit 140 billion this year. So with numbers like that, it obviously gets a lot of attention. It also, you know, can bring up questions around, like, is this really sort of the channel that we think it is? How do we, and as advertisers, how do we engage with it? How do we build that into a media mix that makes sense with everything else that we do and have been doing, and are kind of comfortable with in terms of activation, measurement, et cetera. So Amazon, I think it's important to note too, like Amazon will take on 42% of that global spend. So there's a behemoth, that's sort of taking advantage of a lot of it. That keeps getting sort of dispersed every year differently. Walmart's taking a larger share, but there's a lot of obviously new entrants into the space. Things will definitely change within the next few years. Then on the left side, this is another reason I think that why there's a lot of talk about it, is the total addressable market. So the total addressable market, this is just looking at grocery, is quite large. If we take a subset of that and look at online groceries, again, a subset of in-store, and then an even smaller subset of rapid delivery, which is where Deliveroo is a considerable player, you start to see a huge growth opportunity, and a lot of underpenetration from an online perspective. So again, there's a lot of growth potential, and there's a lot of potential ad spend at play as well. So this is what, again, it's probably not the biggest screen to showcase this, but this is what a retail media offering looks like from our point of view. And so what we see obviously is a mix of off-platform, on-platform solutions. So with off-platform, we've got paid search, we've got CRM, we've got out-of-home as well, and then we've also got our sort of more traditional retail media on-site solutions with display and sponsored products. So, what's interesting here is that you've got off-platform, on-platform. You've also got non-digital as well, with things like sampling and data as a product as well, which is not represented. But what ultimately we're seeing here is kind of a shift, or at least this is what many are sort of predicting, is a shift from retail media as a channel, just like any traditional kind of like media channel, to more of a layer, commerce media as a layer. And what that means ultimately is full funnel, omni-channel, programmatic, so where you can kind of like shift budget, you can activate quickly, scalability, flexibility. I think we're probably a few years away from that, but commerce media as a layer within sort of marketing, I think is not far away. And we're starting to see some signs of that when we see like TikTok ads, for instance, right? So you see like kind of like social playing into e-commerce. And there's a lot of other examples of where display and sponsored products, or where awareness driving upper funnel and performance driving lower funnel are starting to merge. Retail media provides a platform for this, if you can harness all of the assets that are necessary to put it together. The other thing that we start to see is there's a benefit to providing an outlet for displaying display and sponsored products. We worked with Criteo to understand sort of what the conversion rates were. Typically, they're around 151% increased when you're running both platforms. So when you're running kind of more awareness driving upper funnel, and then also driving users to convert through sponsored products. Revenue per user increases as well. We measured it at 287%. So there's an incentive for retail media platforms to build these types of capabilities, and one of which is obviously driving sales for partners, but then also being used as potentially like a brand building tool. So that's a lot of the reason why non-endemic partners have started to venture into the space as well. Deliveroo last year worked with several of them: ITV, Sky, NBC Universal, a lot of sort of players in video games, streaming, film, and anything where there's kind of like a synergy between food and that vertical. So what's the reality of commerce media, retail media? It's not all roses. These are quite complex systems to put in place. They're quite costly as well. There's a lot of third-party tech. If you go sort of with the buy option, there's a lot of internal engineering that needs to happen. If you go with the build option, it's very challenging, and essentially you're creating a media network within an organization. Sometimes that comes with some political challenges, and sometimes it's just very difficult to navigate and get the right stakeholders on board. It's expensive to develop, as we said, and onboard your own tech, sales, and operations team, not just to get it up and running, but obviously to support it. I mean, you're effectively creating a small kind of like media agency within an organization. I think it's really easy to underestimate the complexity as well, technically. And this comes from the way that your retail media or e-commerce platform is set up. It might not be set up necessarily for the injection of advertising in terms of, activation, but also measurement. And data is a core component of this, and not just to make sure that you have a sort of post-campaign reporting as you would like any campaign. But effectively, if you want to use data for insights or for leveraging through a licensing agreement, for instance. So if you want to use data, if you want to monetize it in some way, or if you want to use it for on-site targeting, it has to be clean. It has to be able to sort of serve that function. Another sort of thing that we've seen is, according to some in advertising and marketing, retail media is still a somewhat unproven channel. Quick commerce is, as a subset of retail media, definitely sort of is seen as, where do you fit into my media mix? And so because of that, it's still sort of seen kind of as testing and kind of innovation. And for that, we haven't quite seen a huge sort of like leap into retail media. It depends on the advertiser. Some more mature, some that have been sort of in shopper media and trade media for a long time and have been testing in the space for a while are sort of more keen to lean in. Others where it's unclear sort of what the ROI is, what the how to measure it and how to aggregate it with the rest of their media channels can be somewhat apprehensive. And then finally, the ownership. So what I mean by this is agencies and advertisers working together, and it kind of goes along with my last point where it's not quite clear sometimes where this sits, where retail media sits, commerce media, quick commerce. On the advertiser side, it could sit in a few different places: brand marketing, trade marketing, potentially innovation, e-com. On the agency side, it could sit with buying teams, innovation teams, performance marketing teams. Depending on who you talk to, what entity, it might be totally different. So the other part of that too is media agencies tend to favor media metrics, so reach, frequency, return on ad spend. Whereas an advertiser might focus on more business outcomes, so new to brand, share of voice, basket penetration, more sort of consumer lifetime value type of metrics. So, in terms of building a value proposition, if you were to embark on this journey of retail media, so the things that I sort of look at when it comes to, how can you build something that ultimately differentiates your platform, your experience from others. The first thing that I look at is your brand and how you can leverage your brand, not just to understand what other brands you could work with and you could sort of co-market with, but then also how you can use that to tell your story. So leaning on your brand, I think, is really important here, and we certainly have with Deliveroo. The second part is taking stock of your assets. So what are you doing potentially on the buy side to market your own brand, and how could you incorporate advertising into that? How could you incorporate a brand? So for instance, if we are marketing for Deliveroo Hop, which is our owned and operated rapid delivery service, we can integrate brands like Coca-Cola, Tony's Chocolate, into those ads. And so you're kind of combining above the line marketing with, the sort of retail media advertising. So there's some areas where, you can kind of blend advertising and marketing internally, and really start to experience sort of, a blended experience, I guess, in that way. And then finally, what's your point of differentiation? As we saw, we're in this proliferation phase. There's a lot of retail media networks out there. How's an advertiser or a marketer to think I'll put my spend here or there, or how can I best sort of understand where the opportunities are and what's best for my business, my brand? Well, for Deliveroo, we look at sort of what makes us unique. We're a hyper-local business, meaning everything that you see on your version, it's all personalized. Your version of the app is going to be for product that you can buy in your delivery zone, right? So if that's a takeaway, if that is groceries, or if that is an ad, it's going to be for a product that you can buy. So that we lean into that hyper-local. element. We also lean into brand affinity. We know that we have a really strong brand, and so we play that up. And then also our consumer-first approach. So we're very hyper-focused on making sure that the consumer experience is taken at the heart of what we do, especially in the advertising side. And that's showcased kind of in our creative. Our creative is very Deliveroo branded. Between font, colorway, it feels native, and that's really important for us, is to have an advertiser experience that feels like it's a part of the regular kind of shopper journey. So, what does the future of retail media look like? Just for a bit of fun, I put that question into Midjourney, and it came up with this, which is like a nightmare scenario of digital screens everywhere. I don't think anyone wants that. I certainly don't. But I think what we are going to see is a further collapsing of the media funnel, as we said. I think we're going to see, display platforms, potentially things that were kind of more upper funnel in nature, even maybe into immersive or things that are a bit more innovative. Also having some kind of shopper element or some kind of e-commerce element. And that's going to help build out that commerce media layer. I think we're also going to see some more collaborations between data providers. We're starting to see that with Tesco and Boots working with ITV. We saw that with Sainsbury's working with Channel 4. There's a lot of synergy between these consumers, I guess, and consumer journeys. And there's a lot of insights that can be gleaned from sharing data. And that's firstly done from a targeting perspective and seeing what we can do to measure our audiences, but then also from an insights perspective, how can we see more of the journey? We're starting to see some of those things with Walmart buying Vizio a few weeks back as well. Again, they're kind of starting to blend upper funnel with lower funnel in that way. I think we're going to start to see more of that. Fourthly, smaller retailers are likely to be aggregated into almost like an ad network. We're starting to see that a little bit. I think it's very early days, but the smaller retail players that don't have scale, that's sort of like where they don't have the monthly active users potentially. I think we can imagine some of them will work together to build an aggregated media network. Much easier for a buy, much easier to optimize, and it just creates a stronger, unified offering. And then I think similarly, we're starting to see players like Target in the US start to in-house more. And I think some of that goes back to the flexibility and the complexity of working with a third party. I think some of these bigger networks that can stand alone are going to build their own platforms and sort of take control of not just their data, but also the product development as well. Lastly, standardization. I think this was a big topic last year. I think it will remain a topic for years to come. There's standardization needs for media activation and measurement in retail media. We're just not there yet. It's quite nascent as a channel. But ultimately here, what we're trying to do is to prove incrementality, customer lifetime value, and increase transparency, connectivity, and control. So we're not there. We're not where sort of display and video have been and sort of have built themselves up in the last 15, 20 years. But ultimately, it will need to get to that place in order to be the channel that people are promising it to be make. Lastly, what can marketers think about retail media? So what to take away from this? Well, firstly, incorporating media buying and selling practices in-house. So I think Deliveroo, we did a concerted effort of combining our buying habits and our selling habits and seeing what we could do in terms of synergies. Not just from professionals, so the paid search folks working with us on the advertising page search side, but looking at sort of what you had available to you, coordinating marketing calendars. If we're doing a big Valentine's Day push, how can we go to Cadbury's and say, hey, do you want to be a part of that? So some of these synergies I think pay off in different ways and certainly do pay dividends. Identifying synergies with brands or verticals, kind of going back to what we said about what are those brands, what are those verticals that really work with your brand. We've found a lot of success in that, and Deliveroo has become kind of this brokerage platform in some ways, where we can say, hey, Coca-Cola, do you want to work with Five Guys? We can put you together and we can create an experience for the consumer where, you know, they could get like a promotion or value back. So again, it's kind of like leveraging your assets in that way. This is an example of a partnership we did between Paramount Plus and Pizza Hut last month. Again, how can you differentiate yourself, but then also how can you, find those brands that really work well with your platform. As we talked about, aligning those objectives between your media agency and the advertiser, and making sure that there's just common ground in what you expect. And then lastly, how can you measure this? More than just how can you measure the effectiveness of a campaign, but really how can you measure the incrementality of retail media? Where does it fit within your marketing mix and within the purchase journey? How does it fit your consumer? And ultimately, where does commerce media, mean to you and your brand? That's it.